On today's video, the tools you're gonna need for flood cleanup and some tips for how to use them. All right, let's get going. You know, Hurricane Irma just hit Florida this past weekend, and all over Florida they're seeing flooding and massive destruction. And 2 weeks ago here in Texas, we had Hurricane Harvey. I was down in Houston this past weekend doing some flood cleanup, and I thought, you know, a video on how to do this, what tips and what tools I can recommend might be the way to go. And as well, my church is doing a bunch of flood cleanup down in Houston. I'm based here in Austin, Texas, and they put together a demo toolkit. So I thought this video would kind of review what are the demo tools you need, whether you're a volunteer or whether you're working on your own house. Okay, let's get going. So first off, in the demo phase, we're gonna concentrate on getting anything that's wet out of the house. You're gonna wanna first do carpeting or anything that's saturated on the floor, get that out. And your basic tools for that, of course, are just your cheap old knife. These Milwaukee fastbacks with a fresh blade on there, they're gonna cut all that carpet out and you wanna haul that out. That's your very first step. The next thing you're gonna do is you're probably gonna start into the sheetrock after that. The sheetrock needs to come out anywhere it's gotten wet and below. You're not gonna be able to salvage the sheetrock. So typically I'd recommend if you've got a 3-foot flood line, go up to the 4-foot seam, because all the sheetrock in the house is typically run horizontally on a 4-foot section. So go up to that seam. If you just have a foot of floodwaters in your house, you could just go 6 inches above that and make sure that sheetrock's dry, cut that, and everything from there below is gonna have to come out. If it's gotten wet, we need to dry that, so we're gonna demo that. Another tool that I found really handy, especially as we're talking about insulation, is this one from Milwaukee. This runs about 15 bucks, and with the serrated long blade here, we could actually slice that insulation and pull it out. Remember, when we're pulling insulation, we don't want to pull it down, because later when we rebuild, we want that insulation in the upper part of the cavity. We just want to take the lower section that's been wet. Okay, next up, some crowbars. We're gonna wanna get 2 sizes. Stanley makes these. This is a 21 inch and this is probably a 12 inch. And then I also like to have a small one as well in case we're doing some delicate work on some trim. You also wanna get a pair of nippers. After you're done pulling everything out of that section, you wanna de-nail everything. You don't want any nails left. Those are gonna rust and they can be a real hazard to people that are coming back and working or potentially living in these houses. Nippers allow you to push this all the way in on the nail, grip lightly onto the nail, and then rock this. It's gonna pull that nail out. Of course, you want a good hammer as well. I actually prefer the straight back hammer rather than the curved claw. I think it's easier when we're pulling nails and when we're doing demo work. A couple other things you're going to want to bring with you. A 16-to-1 screwdriver. You're going to want to pull potentially electrical plates, other things like that out. You're also going to want to bring both a drill and an impact gun so you can quickly remove things. But one of the vital tools that I found this weekend working in Houston was this right here. This is a multi-tool. This is actually a Dremel version, about 100 bucks. And you want to get this specific blade. This is the bimetal half-moon shaped blade that's going to cut both wood and potentially nails. This is super handy for when you're cutting cabinets. Hey Lowell, tell me what you're doing back there, man.
So right now we're trying to save this cabinet because only the back portion has really been saturated. The rest of this can be saved. So I'm cutting out the back section so that we can put that back in later and save most of these cabinets.
And show me which tool you're using for that.
So I'm using a Dremel fine tool. You can put a variety of different bits on here. And this is the bit that I'm using to cut this out. And I'm just cutting out this back section with this tool. It's real simple to do.
All right, man, show us what to do. That oscillating tool at the very back, flush cutting the back of that. He's not plunging too deep. He's trying to keep it just about the depth of the plywood in the back. He's gonna go all the way around the perimeter. That way we can pull the back off and dry the back of the cabinet out. You know, some cabinets are gonna get destroyed in the flood. If they're a particle board cabinet, like an IKEA cabinet, they're not gonna survive the flood. You gotta trash them. Other houses, if they only had a couple of days, 2 or 3 days of floodwaters, and they are real plywood cabinets, you're gonna potentially be able to save and dry out those cabinets. You can cut the back out of the cabinet on exterior walls so that you can get access to the stud bays, and then behind there, pull all that insulation, all that sheetrock out, get it nice and clean. But the carcass or the case, as long as it's in relatively good shape, that could be saved. Now, a lot of times the doors are gonna blow up and expand. You're not gonna be able to salvage the doors. But even if you can salvage the carcass, that's a big win for your clients over there. Okay, next thing, Milwaukee Sawzall. You know, you're not gonna use your Sawzall a lot, but one thing I found was I had a fiberglass tub on an outside wall and we had to demo the tub. It was a shame. but that tub had to go because we had to get to the wet insulation behind. It's your goal when you're there to get everything that's wet either out or available to dry. And once insulation has gotten wet behind a tub, there's really no way to dry that. You're gonna have to demo that tub. Now, if it's a cast iron tub, go gently. You can reuse that tub. It's gonna be safe. But if it's a fiberglass tub, you're gonna have to destroy it to get it out. The other thing you might want to consider is an angle grinder with a blade that's going to cut through both tile and potentially concrete. That way you can slice out the tile and bring out that wet area, but leave the rest intact. Okay, on the bigger tool side, you want to bring your shop vac with you. You also want to bring a good wheelbarrow like this. I found this double wheel version with this big poly bed in there. It looks like a big dump truck, and we were able to really truck large amounts of debris out of the house and stack it curbside. Now, when everything was finished, this squeegee was super helpful. When you're all done with this demo phase, we want to go for a white glove clean. And so you actually might consider hosing out the house, especially if the house has a bunch of silt in it. It's already gotten wet, so it's not going to hurt to hose it down. Then you can use a squeegee to get all that water out of the house. You can use the shop vac to get the rest of that small amount of water up. And then you're going to want to set up your fans and dehumidifiers. Remember that mold's going to start growing after only 2 or 3 days of floodwaters or materials getting wet. And here's a quick sample of the drywall out of the house that we worked on in Houston. Look at that. We've got all kinds of nasty stuff on this sample. So the last thing I want to talk about is your personal protection. The entire time you're working on the house, at a bare minimum, you want to have a mask that has an N95 rating. These ones that have an exhale valve are really nice, but if you're working on an older house, a house pre-1978, you might have some asbestos or some lead-based paint issues. You want to take an extra level precaution, and that's where a P100 half-face respirator is going to come in handy. Not handy, it's vital. This is really going to filter all that stuff out because it's your lungs that are the #1 thing you need to protect. Now, of course, gloves, rubber boots, glasses, all those kinds of things are necessary. But the most important is protecting those lungs. Okay, now that we've demoed out the house, we've cleaned it up with potentially some hose water, some fresh water. The last step before you leave these people and before you head back home is going to be doing a germ cleanup or a bacteria cleanup. All those floodwaters potentially have sewage in them and all kinds of nasty things. Most of the houses you're going to work on are going to smell pretty bad. What you want to do is do a Clorox cleanup. A half cup of bleach to 1 gallon of water, mix that into a spray rig like this, and spray down every surface that got wet. Just a light mist is all you need. If there's other areas in the house that you can see mold growth, you want to scrub that off as well. Wear a full mask, wear your respirator. You don't want that stuff in your lungs. Clean that entire house up, and then set up the fans and dehumidifiers to dry. If you're able to come back later, a week or so later after the house is really dried out, give it a smell test. This is not a scientific test, but you're going to be able to tell if things are still growing in there. If it smells better than when you were doing demo, it probably means you've gotten everything out. And the very last step is going to be using a mold control like this. Concrobium, again, you can put that into your pump sprayer, and we're going to spray down every surface. Guys, that's it. There's a lot of work down there in Houston. There's going to be a lot of work in Florida. I'm praying that God supplies what you need. Remember that this is a time to reconnect with the Lord. There's been some people's lives who have just been forever altered, and I know there's going to be a lot of houses that decades later may not be repaired. So I really encourage you to link up with a church. I'll put a link to mine on there where you can get out and volunteer to help. There's going to be a ton of people that are going to need help for years to come. Long after NBC News has stopped talking about it, there's going to be people's houses that need work. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.